All right, we are going to now go on to Idaho. And Jamie Oots, did I pronounce your last name right, Jamie?
Close, it's Utes.
Utes.
Yeah.
All right.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Let me just say off the bat, I'm kind of sad to be following Jerry because I'm also representing a state department, and ironically enough, even some of our pictures and things are the same. So we're facing similar challenges here in Idaho and similar success stories as well. So to start with, our mission is to preserve, protect, perpetuate, and manage Idaho's wildlife resources. That's kind of our state tagline. And, you know, for a lot of folks, you know, and a lot of our funding sources, it's true that, you know, we're kind of one of those agencies that caters to hunters primarily. That's where bread and butter comes from. However, we do manage to, you know, engage in other projects, and including in the state right now, we're doing a lot of translocations similar to what Wyoming's getting up to. So our mission is kind of, you can kind of bend it to sort of say, well, how does this relate to beaver? And that's basically, we're approaching the management of beaver as kind of a tool for habitat and in-stream habitat restoration. So in Idaho, and I'm sure a lot of other states in this talk, you know, we have a lot of really dry landscapes that are only getting drier, especially after the nasty drought we had this summer. So basically, we're kind of looking at beaver management as an approach to benefit game and non-game species alike. So game species, you know, the very holy greater sage grouse, you know, that's a very obviously continues to be a hot topic species for us in the West here. You know, they can benefit from beaver translocations, you know, a lot of different ungulate species like pronghorn, other things, waterfowl. I'm sure everyone here is aware of all the wonderful things that beavers can do for other species in the landscape. Then we've also got non-game species, and that's kind of my wheelhouse. I'm what used to be called the non-game biologist. So I'm looking at all those things that, you know, don't have antlers on their heads, including Columbia spotted frogs, other amphibians. We've got a lot of invertebrates that can benefit from beaver management. And then another thing too that, you know, might not be as familiar with some of the people on this conference is we do have to manage beaver populations for the trapping community. You know, they're part of, you know, our constituency. It's not a very large community anymore, I would say, but they are very enthusiastic. And, you know, for some people, it's a hobby. Others, it's almost a way of life. It's very culturally ingrained into what we do here. And so we have to respect that as well. Next slide, please, Jackie. So here's my image of a beaver in a trap. Jerry had one in a Hancock trap earlier. So basically, we've got a lot of different opportunities for beaver and the take of it. It is classified as a fur bearer. Trapping, however, is the only allowable method of take. You can't shoot them, of course. And the seasons do vary by region. In my region in particular, I'm in the southwest corner of Idaho, and our beaver season is just around the corner. It's going to start in November and run into the springtime. And basically, we don't have a limit of take. However, we do track the number of beaver trappers. We look at statewide harvest on a Huck 4 level watershed and catch per unit effort to kind of manage harvest. Overall, I would say that harvest is pretty low, and it's definitely focused more in our larger river systems, not so much in areas where we have beaver mediated habitat restoration efforts. So up in the drier, smaller drainages and some of our drier mountain ranges. So closures and controlled trapping, we do have that in areas to address specific resource goals and to also maintain a balance between consumptive and non-consumptive users. Obviously, it's always something I lament that our non-consumptive users don't have a voice so much in the state of Idaho anyway, in terms of, you know, we don't have any state tax dollars going to our agency. Almost all of our funds are coming from license and tag sales. So that's one of the things hopefully we can address into the future to kind of get that voice into the conversation as well. So all translocation efforts in Idaho have to have our permission as a department. We can't just let anyone do that. And one of the reasons that we keep a tight grip on sort of translocations from here to there is that we are worried sometimes about disease transmission. You know, there's something called whirling disease, which affects trout, and we do have that in certain drainages. in Southwest Idaho, but not everywhere. And if we just go, Johnny Appleseeding beavers around just anywhere without consideration for what they could be moving, both, in their fur, in their gut systems, then, we could end up making more of a mess than what we started with. So a lot of our beavers, we have nuisance complaints that are managed through the department, and we do issue kill permits for that. You don't have to have a license to have a kill permit. However, you do have to apply for one and then report back to us what you did or did not end up killing. I'm trying to change the narrative a little bit, at least in my own region, about not just handing out kill permits too readily, but rather doing some mitigation strategies of, wrapping trees, putting in pond levelers like some of the other folks were talking about. And it's also important, it's a little bit of a fine line for us because, folks will call us and say, I have this beaver problem. Legally, our depredation corner of the department, beaver are not a species that we are legally obligated to respond to. So, for example, if there's a herd of elk that's eating someone's alfalfa field, we do legally have to respond to that and use our own resources for that. However, we don't have that same relationship with beaver. So it's important for us to not put the impression out there to the public at large that we are going to run out and help you solve every beaver problem, because we just don't have the time and resources for it, as I'm sure a lot of people can understand and appreciate. So relocation, like I said, is managed by us. There's limited opportunity here for volunteers. However, we are starting to kind of bring some folks into the fold with our translocation project. And it's a really great opportunity when we can do it to get volunteers on. So a lot of times, when we have them in captivity, we dip into volunteers for the beaver husbandry side of things, going up there every day to change their water, give them fresh food, that kind of thing, kind of plays zookeeper. And then also when we go to release the animals into a watershed, into their new home, it's a very rewarding thing for volunteers to do, and it gets people really excited about the project at large. And also gives, people an opportunity to see some part of the Idaho Fish and Game that they might not normally see. A lot of folks who hear about this project will say to us like, oh, I didn't know the Idaho Fish and Game did such a thing. And it's understandable that they didn't kind of anticipate that, but it's a good, opportunity for us to get that word out there. So next slide, Jackie. So our biggest challenges kind of fall into what I would consider sort of two groups. So, and I'm sure Jerry and other folks who are translocating and also working with the public can really understand kind of how tricky a balance this can sometimes be. So on the ground, despite careful consideration of potential release sites and confirmation that a site has a lot of critical resources to keep those beavers happy, oftentimes they will move away from a site. And it's kind of an unpredictable pattern of dispersal. Sometimes they'll stick around and they'll be there and they'll be happy. And other times they'll hang out for a few days and then you'll find them up on a hillside dead, on this dry sage foothill. And it's difficult to understand why they're moving the way they are. And just to kind of sidetrack a little bit, in the very first picture of the presentation, you saw a beaver in the corner, kind of in our holding facility, and you might have seen there's a small tag on their tail. And what we do is we kind of pierce their tail and put this radio transmitter, it's a VHF transmitter, onto their tails. And so then once we release them onto a landscape, we can follow up and listen for them using radio telemetry gear to see where they're going. So we have this unpredictable dispersal. And then also, our survival rate isn't great, especially because we are dealing with water scarce landscapes. Our survival rate is pretty typical of that of other, water stressed environments. Folks who are doing this in Utah and some drier areas, maybe Nevada. It's a big change to take a nuisance beaver out of, for example, the Boise River system and put it into, this dry landscape up in the mountains. However, when we're sourcing our beavers from these nuisance opportunities and these nuisance problems of people in town or even on these ranches where, maybe irrigation canals are getting clogged up or, windbreak trees are being taken down, it's important to remember that those animals almost certainly would have been killed anyway. A lot of times our situations are such that we either try to put the department resources towards live trapping these animals to use them for our translocation project, or the other option really is just to write a kill permit. So, even though our survival is not quite at the level that we would like to see, we are still giving these animals a second chance, and, they do make it. They also, it's something that we do need to improve. For example, there's a study out of Wyoming a couple years ago that found that an average of about 17 beavers need to be released into one site before young are born. So you really kind of have to anticipate, like, okay, I think this drainage could support, 2-3 colonies. You're going to put more beavers in than you might expect because of, conditions that we really can't control. If the water dries up because of drought conditions. We had a lot of bobcat predation at one of our sites this year. So, we're doing what we can. Solutions here would be coordination with other agencies, and then experimenting. We're experimenting right now with soft release techniques in terms of, some brief supplemental feeding where we put them into their new places, creating artificial lodges, or, encouraging them to use existing bank burrows. And then challenges in the office are kind of, another big thing. One of the biggest problems that I've kind of bumped up against is interagency inconsistency. So for example, a field district or a field manager from one district might allow, carte blanche beaver release, while in a neighboring district of the same agency, you have to go through a ton of paperwork hoops and a lot of red tape. So when there's differences even within agencies themselves with how easy or difficult it's going to be to do these releases, that can make things, pretty complicated. And then, as Jerry had mentioned, coordination and sourcing of animals, especially from nuisance situations, which is what we did this past year. It does kind of create an erratic supply and demand sort of situation where, we might have a lot of beavers in captivity who are ready to go, but we cannot, because of, some kind of agency problem, you can't get permission just yet to release them into the drainage that we want, or then vice versa. We've got all these opportunities to release beavers in, whatever section of maybe a Forest Service district, but we can't get any beavers at the moment because they're just kind of, in this summertime lull of not causing so many problems. So it's definitely a lot of creativity here in terms of sourcing animals as well. One of the things that we do sometimes is we will pay our pest control service people in Boise, folks who trap out beavers from people's ponds, and then again would normally lethally control these animals. We pay to bring those animals into our holding facility, and then we'll release them. So creativity in that and just flexibility is a really big issue that we always have to deal with. So next slide. All right, so our success stories, one of them that maybe folks are somewhat familiar with is, we just had a viral video that came out a couple years ago about how the Idaho Fish and Game used to literally parachute beavers into drainages in remote wilderness areas in mostly the central part of the state. And that was actually a pretty effective way of getting beavers back into some of these drainages, but mostly because our predator population at that time was almost non-existent. There was no lions, wolves, bears. Happily, all of those creatures are back into our ecosystem, so we can't quite parachute anything anymore. However, our present success, we've got a lot of, again, relocation and mitigation strategies that are at play right now. So pond levelers and culvert cages, we're using those in situations where landowners may not want the animals killed or removed, or existing beaver colonies are creating good conditions for other species, and we should only use lethal control as a last resort. So you can see kind of in that bottom left photo, that's kind of a culvert cage that we've built around a really large culvert. And despite a couple, 3 freeze thaw cycles, we've had a lot of success with that, and it's still in place. And then also too, we're doing a lot of beaver dam analog work as well. So that's one of the other ways we're softening release sites, but also bringing the positive effects of beaver to a landscape if live translocation is not an option. So In the bottom right picture, the middle right picture, you'll see a pond there. That was some BDAs, or beaver dam analogs, that we installed on private property for a rancher. And then he also wanted some beavers to be released there too. And so this picture is really heartwarming to me because you can see some mud packed along the bottom of the post there. Those are all from our translocated beavers who set up shop in this drainage and then decided to take it upon themselves to improve the BDA. And so a lot of regions in the fish and game, throughout the state, we're all implementing beaver translocation projects right now. And our release sites are targeted to maximize the positive effect on the surrounding landscape and then resident game and non-game species. And I think that's about it. So thanks for your attention. I appreciate, Jackie, the invitation to talk at your summit.
Thank you so much, Jamie. You and Jerry are just incredible resources. And so I'm so happy that you were able to do these presentations and for people to hear you and hear all the efforts that you both are doing in your states is just, it's really inspiring. So thank you very much.